Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we ask an awful lot of questions. You can also become a bitter pill by visiting patreon.com/The Bitter Truth, where you get some fabulous swag to make your life better. Today, very grateful to have on the show. I'd like to consider him a friend on the show because he's been on once before and doesn't hate me. So we're here. Awesome. Howie Hawkins, who is running for the Green Party ticket. The convention is going to be in July, I believe. But a lot of things have been happening the last couple of weeks, especially with the COVID virus and everything else. And just so you get a little background, Howie Hawkins is a former Teamster. He's been a New York candidate for governor 3 different times with enough percentages to get into the next race, and did very, very well, and was able to actually push Andrew Cuomo as much as one can push Andrew Cuomo to some more progressive policies. But Howie, how are you, man?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, just really, really grateful that you're here. We were off for a few weeks, like I was telling you off mic, and nice, little re-entry into the world with having you come on. You're one of the founding members of the Green Party. So how's your week been? I mean, it's been kind of crazy with COVID and everything else, and then Bernie dropped out of the race.
Yeah, well, since he dropped out, and then yesterday when he endorsed Biden, we've had a flood of people coming to our campaign.
Right.
Last week, we raised about 30% of all the money we raised during the campaign. We've had 1,000 donors, lots of volunteers, a lot of energy.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. So, what kind of vibe are you hearing? I mean, to be honest, I was calling this about a year ago. I never forgave him for 16. I shouldn't say I never forgave him. It's not like I wanted anything bad to happen to him, but I never forgot what happened in 16. And then, my friends that were kind of jumping on the bandwagon again accused me of not forgiving him and being a big baby. And I'm like, how someone does anything is how they do everything. He's not going to go all the way. Just watch. And sure enough, you can't have somebody who's more antithetical to your policies than a Joe Biden. And yet he's endorsing this guy. What have you seen on the ground since this happened?
Well, the Bernie supporters are divided. This has not provoked a massive split from the Democratic Party where the progressive wing just leaves.
Right.
But there's a good flow. Of course, they're debating, should we settle for Joe Biden, who's against everything we were for with Bernie Sanders, like
right.
Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, an economic Bill of Rights, student and medical debt relief, and the whole program.
Right.
Do we settle for a guy who's maybe not as bad as Trump, but not for anything we wanted? Or do we go with the Greens and keep campaigning for what we wanted?
Right.
So that's the debate going on in the camp of Sanders supporters.
Right.
And we're getting a lot of people deciding, let's keep fighting for what we're fighting for.
Sure.
Right through November.
Well, that's the thing, though. Is like, what are you going to get with the Joe Biden? The guy's record, I mean, it just seems amazing to me that the Democrats can just, when it was all about the pussy grabbing and a Republican doing it, or Brett Kavanaugh, believe her, believe women. Now everyone seems to want to forget, and that I'm told that I'm a baby. Wah wah wah. One of my buddies locally here. We don't do anything anymore because we're all in the house. But we're on a text thread together, and he's like, he was endorsed. I'm like, really? He was endorsed? Fabian and the Backstreet Boys were endorsed by like Anita Bryant. Who gives a crap? It's like Joe Biden couldn't be further away policy-wise. All I have to say is crime bill. And it shocks me that nobody knows what that is. When I call them a racist and they go, what are you talking about? Crime bill. They have no idea what I'm talking about. They have no idea what the word super predator means, that he invented it. I mean, are you seeing people, I'm seeing fewer people defend him, I guess is what I'm trying to say, than I'm seeing, people, falling in line. I mean, what are you guys seeing?
It's hard to get a full read on that because we're probably not getting all the fallout of people who don't want to settle for Biden.
Right.
And what I'm telling those folks is, don't get lost in the sauce.
Right.
If you're a Sanders supporter, a Sanders socialist or progressive, and you vote for Biden, nobody's going to know that was a progressive vote. Biden's
right.
a corporate Democrat. They won't know how many of those votes were from progressives and how many from the corporate Democrats. And the progressives will get it taken for granted.
Right.
You vote for the Greens, there's no question as to what that vote means.
Right.
it does mean to vote for a Green New Deal,
Right.
Medicare for all, and the rest of the program.
Right. Well, hey, listen, you got a couple of guys that are, vying for the nomination as well. You got Dario Hunter and you got David Roldy. Is it Roldy or Rolled?
I think it's rolled.
Rolled. And I beg your pardon. I didn't get to dig on these guys before we got started. But are these guys for real, or are they like carpetbaggers, kind of trying to just kind of get a nomination out of this for their resume? Are they for real, or are they? What are these guys about?
Well, I'm just trying to campaign on what I'm about.
Good. Okay.
And, in the end, whoever gets the nomination, we got to come together. So, I've just been emphasizing my program,
right,
which leads with the Green New Deal to deal with the climate crisis,
right,
the Economic Bill of Rights to deal with the inequality crisis, which is also a life or death issue. Life expectancies for the working class in this country are declining. And that's because people got to choose between rent and going to the doctor too often. And then we have this new nuclear arms race. So I'm calling for nuclear disarmament initiatives. And they should lead to a real negotiation among the nuclear powers for complete and mutual nuclear disarmament. So those are the issues I'm leading with. And then, of course, I get asked all the time, well, why are you spoiling the election? And my answer is no, the Democrats are spoiling the election.
That's right.
Because there's an answer to it. It's called ranked choice national popular vote for president.
Right.
And the Democrats, instead of fighting for that, replacing the Electoral College with that reform, they pick on the Greens and tell us to go away. But if we go away, none of these issues will even be raised.
Well, they did that with the Libertarians too. I mean, I'm in Texas, right? Pretty conservative state. And just interviewed a guy a few months back, a guy named Neil Dykman, Libertarian, and he took the state to court because in Texas they came up with this really clever idea, and it applied to everybody, not just Libertarians, but he basically took it to court for everybody, which I thought was cool. But they basically instituted a law where unless you're Republican or Democrat, and they worked this out by numbers, you're paying $3,125 to register to vote in Texas. So if you're not one of the major twos, R's or D's, you're paying $3,100. And he was able to get that. He was able to get a temporary injunction placed on that in December, and then the state attorney general decided she wasn't going to honor the injunction, and she kept charging candidates, Greens and Libs, $3,100 and more. Because Kerry McKinnon's running for Senate out here, he got charged $5,000 to run for office.
Oh, and that's a filing fee for office.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and but it doesn't apply to R's and D's, because if you have a certain amount of percentages in the last election, blah 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 blah, right. The Greens and the Libs don't meet that, so they're paying that filing fee, whereas the Democrats pay $250, the Republicans pay $250. Republicans or Greens and Libs are paying $3,100 on up, right? So Neil Dykman got that injunction, and then the attorney, and now he's got to go back to court, this in the spring here, because she decided not to honor that, which is really great. The judge said, you can't do it. She said, no, I'm going to do it. And that's kind of like where I want to get, because I want to get into your platform here. But as far as the spoilers that you're talking about here, that's the kind of thing that you're seeing kind of all over the place. They just can't cheat enough. The Democrats cheated up and down this primary season. It was ridiculous.
Oh, I got a story from New York that's similar. You're talking about Republican officials in Texas. We've got Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, who right now looks pretty good compared to the incompetent in the White House on the coronavirus response. But while he's doing those press briefings, the state budget is being passed, and he attached to it, under cover of the coronavirus crisis, a provision that triples the ballot line qualifications for third parties in the state.
Wow.
So we have to get basically 3 times the number of votes that we used to have to get.
Wow.
We got to get it every 2 years instead of every 4 years.
Right.
And this threshold it'll probably be about 155,000 votes in this election if we have the same turnout as we had in 2016 for president. And the only 2 Green candidates to ever get more than that were Ralph Nader in 2000 and me running for governor in 2014. So when this came out, the New York Times wrote a story. The headline said, the Democrats' secret plan to kill third parties. And at that time, it was attached to it was supposed to be a public finance law, and they added this, and it was done by a commission set up by the legislature. And we went to court and got it thrown out because the legislature has to make laws, not commissions they appoint.
Right.
And that was 2 weeks before the budget was adopted. So the court threw it out, and Cuomo said, okay, I'll just attach it to the budget. And he also got a rule passed in the legislature where if you want to vote no, you got to be physically present in the chamber. If you want to vote yes, you can do it remotely.
Of course.
And of course, there are several people, I think it's 5 now, members of the assembly are have the COVID-19.
Oh, man.
So people don't want to go down there. So that's the fun and games we got here in New York. And it's the Democrats here instead of the Republicans. But neither party wants the competition.
Right.
And
right.
you mentioned earlier, I pushed Cuomo. I got 5% running for governor in 2014. He wanted to run up the vote that year to get ready to run for president. He wanted to get more than his father, Mario Cuomo, ever got running for governor. He wanted to get more than he got in 2010 when he was first elected, and he got less. And he had to look at, 5% of the people voted for Howie Hawkins and the Greens. What were they talking about?
Right.
And in order to compete for our votes, he had to move on issues he'd never supported. So we got a ban on fracking. We got a $15 minimum wage, and we got paid family leave. So, that shows that you don't have to win the office to have influence. And so that's why, we're in this race to, me being elected president is a long shot, but us getting a decent vote and forcing these issues into the public debate is a real shot.
Well, see, and that's the thing, too. He was responsible for eviscerating 10,000 hospital beds, and isn't he standing in the way of almost $9.5 billion in aid? And then he gave a tax break to the top 1% of New York while he's eviscerating hospital beds. I mean,
he may look good on TV responding to the coronavirus crisis, but he set himself up for being short of hospital beds.
Right.
We've lost 21,000 beds since 2000. Wow. And a lot of them during his tenure since 2010.
Right.
We've lost 41 hospitals in that same period, a lot of them during his tenure.
Wow.
And so that's what austerity gets you. And now he's begging people around the country to send, even staff as well as beds and personal protective equipment and ventilators and the whole everything.
Well, and to piggyback on that, let's just jump into it because you've got an economic bill of rights, and it doesn't sound like it's too dissimilar from what FDR tried to at least introduce toward the end of his life. Is it pretty close?
Yeah, it's the basic same idea. I mean, he called on Congress to enact an economic bill of rights in his last 2 State of the Union addresses, 1944 and 1945.
Right.
And none of them were adopted. Pieces of them were in the Democratic platform, but even when they had majorities of both houses in the presidency, they didn't enact them like what we today call Medicare for All. Back then they called national health insurance. The civil rights movement picked it up in the 60s with the March on Washington in 1963, the Freedom Budget in 1966, and the Poor People's Campaign in 1968. And what they added was these rights have to be available to everybody without discrimination. Because one problem with the New Deal is it was racially biased. For example, domestic workers and agricultural workers were not covered by Social Security originally.
Right.
And, there's a book out called When Affirmative Action Was White. It's a description of the New Deal.
Right.
So that's what the civil rights movement added. And at the end of the 60s, we didn't get any of those rights. Right. And so, what we're trying to do is pick it up again. So we've got 6 basic rights.
Right.
Jobs, income, housing, healthcare, education, and a secure retirement. And we have programs on how the federal government can provide a real social safety net for people and make sure everybody who's willing and able to work has a job. Everybody who's below the poverty line is brought above it, and they have a home, access to healthcare, public education, lifelong, and when they retire, they can retire and live.
Right. Well, I mean, and you always hear this question, and I think more people are getting, woken. I hate that word because it's that woke bullshit, but they're getting more, hip to the fact that we have money. It's like Ben Bernanke said, all you got to do is, tap, tap, tap on a special computer. It's not even taxpayer dollars. It just adds zeros to an account, and it's quantitative easing, like what Jill Stein was talking about 4 years ago, and everybody made fun of her when she was talking about forgiving student loan debt. Well, it turns out to forgive student loan debt is 1 day of bank bailouts, right? We have the money. We're in 9 wars right now. We have the money. So when people say, where do you get the money? We're not going to have our taxes go up by a whole ton if we get some of these plans that you're talking about, right?
Well, when you do quantitative easing, in the end, because what's that based on? The Treasury issues Treasury securities. Mm-hmm. The Fed creates credit on its balance sheet and then buys them off the market and puts it on its balance sheet. But in the end, the taxpayers have to pay the principal and interest on those bonds.
Right.
Now, the Greens have another program in our platform. It's really a modern-day version of the old greenback demand of the populist movement. And that would have the federal government create these dollars. We'd have a monetary authority in the Treasury Department and spend them into the economy through the federal budget. And those would be debt-free dollars.
Okay.
The problem when we do quantitative easing is we're borrowing from Wall Street. Right. And in the end, we're transferring money to them on the taxpayers' backs. But given the situation we're in now, there's the modern money theory people that people talk about, and they make the valid point that as long as the dollar is the reserve currency of the world, we can pretty much borrow everything we need to make the investments we need.
Right.
And, we're going to have to do that to deal with this climate crisis.
Sure.
Detailed with a political economist, a detailed budget for an eco-socialist Green New Deal. And it's $42 trillion over 10 years. Now, that includes the Economic Bill of Rights.
Right.
The green economy reconstruction part is $27 trillion. And I think that's pretty accurate. Bernie Sanders' bill or Green New Deal is $16.3 trillion over 10 years. But he's on a slower timeline because he doesn't get to 100% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions until 2050. Mm-hmm. We're going for 2030, simply because that's what the climate scientists
are saying.
Carbon budgets say.
Yeah.
If rich countries like the United States have to do if we're going to avoid the worst of climate change.
So how do we get people unbaked out of the, because we don't need the defense we have. We're in 149 countries right now. We support 73% of the world's dictators until we don't. We're spending about $1.2 trillion according to Forbes. You see the budget been up over the last 3 years. We've given Trump $130 billion extra over what he asked for. Each of the last 3 years, it was like, I think, $80 billion the first year, then 25 the last couple of years. It's $130 billion. And it's $1 trillion. And we're in 9 wars right now. People don't even know that. They don't even seem to know that. The other day, right before the crash, I was hanging out with my buddies, and one of my friends like, "Oh, I love Barack Obama." And I'm like, "Can you tell me one thing you like about him?" Because I can tell you 2 things: 2 wars to 7, and 5.1 million people kicked out of their houses. So what do you love about the guy? But then he's like, "Oh, he was able to still create a solid defense and a robust economy." First of all, we don't have a robust economy. Walmart jobs is not a robust economy. Wall Street and the stock market is not the economy. And the defense budget. So, how much of the defense budget would you want to cut as president if, to offset? Because I think we can get down to $300 billion. We still outspend the Russians by 5 times and the Chinese by twice.
Yeah, we're talking about a similar number. I'm calling for a 75% cut in military spending.
Okay.
And I'm actually working with some policy wonks to actually say what force structures, what foreign bases, what weapon systems we can cut to reach that number. I picked 75% because the U.S. cut 75% in the first 2 years after World War II. So we know it can be done.
Right.
And that would leave us with, depending on whether you count the Pentagon budget proper or like you were referring to, the $1.2 trillion when you count, like nuclear weapons are in the Energy Department.
Right.
The Department of Homeland Security is a whole nother national security operation. And so there's a lot more that we spend on the military than is just in the Department of Defense budget.
Sure.
So that's what we're looking at. And you're right. We don't need all that. That's not about defending us. Nope. There are very few conventional military threats to the territory of the United States that you can even conceive of.
Sure.
The one threat that we do have is nuclear weapons, and that's a huge problem. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists recently moved their doomsday clock the closest to midnight it's ever been.
Right.
Because of this runaway nuclear arms race. So, what we should do is my program is let's do some initiatives to reduce tensions. Let's pledge no first use of nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm.
We've never pledged that. Let's unilaterally disarm to a minimum credible deterrent. And then on the basis of those tension reducing initiatives, go to the nuclear powers and say, let's mutually and completely get rid of nuclear weapons, because even a small nuclear war will create a nuclear winter, and that'll be the end of all of us, because there'll be so much debris up in the sky, crops won't grow for a decade. And, we got other problems that, like Pakistan and India, who are right now having some border skirmishes.
Yeah.
Decide to fire. They both have over 100 nukes each. That would trigger a nuclear winter.
Yeah.
And so this is a huge problem. Now, 2 years ago, well, it's 3 years ago now almost, 122 nations agreed to the text of a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And the International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. And that's another thing hardly anybody in this country even knows.
Sure.
None of the presidential candidates, except for Mike Gravel when he was in, and me, have raised this issue.
Right.
And I want to make it a top campaign issue because it's a life or death issue for us.
Well, I was thinking,
that's one piece of the defense budget we can cut.
Right.
And in general, I think we can do more to promote our security and peace in the world and the values we say we're for, human rights and democracy, by being the world's humanitarian superpower instead of its global military empire.
Right.
We should take our Green New Deal and go global with it and help people leap out of the 19th century fossil fuel infrastructure into the 21st century solar infrastructure. And that, I think, would do more to promote peace than sending in the Marines.
It's cheaper too. I mean, it's cheaper. It's like $30 billion to feed the entire world a year.
Yes.
That's in food and water, and I think to house everybody in the world would be $80 billion a year. For $100 billion, we could be the world's food water people, and everyone would love us. Like when people give me this shit about, I'm half Palestinian. My dad's Palestinian. My mom's from Brazil. Me and my brothers and cousins are all first generation here, right? So I got 1 foot in here and 1 foot over here. So when people say things like, why don't they like us? I'm tired of being in the world. They're so ungrateful. And I'm like, I don't know what you're saying, but we need to go to the West Bank. We should visit the West Bank. We should visit Gaza. We should visit Yemen. We should visit Syria and Libya. We should visit parts of Europe that we fuck with still. We should visit Greece. These are the things that we do as a country. It's great to live here, but the American exceptionalism is that we are so whiz-bang awesome and that people believe John Wayne was really a veteran and that Red Dawn was a documentary. So how do we, you know what I mean? It's like, by the way, John Wayne was an asshole, just FYI. But yeah, so how do we get that baked in the brain bullshit? Well, we can't cut defense. Yes, we can. The Chinese just upped their spend to $225 billion last year. The Russians spend $80 billion. It was 65 up until about a year ago. And they're still the number 2 nuclear power in the world. And so it's like, what are Americans missing? They complain about being the world's policeman, but then they say it's okay to, be all over the world and be in all these places because we need to defend ourselves.
Well, I think what we're missing is a political force in this country that points these things out to people with credibility. Mm-hmm. The Democrats and Republicans may fight like cats and dogs over guns, God, gays, and abortion.
That's right.
But when it comes to foreign policy and military policy, they're on the same team.
Yep.
Look at this attempt to overthrow the government of Venezuela.
Yep. Except
for a few marginal progressives in Congress, the whole Democratic leadership was with Trump on that one.
Sure were.
And Bolivia. You don't hear people complaining about what happened there on the Democratic side any more than the Republican side.
Nope.
And so I think, the American people have been miseducated, misinformed, and it's partly because our political system, along with our corporate media, which is very subservient to the establishment, including the military establishment, are not informing the people of what's really going on.
Right.
When their opinion polls taken by reputable polling organizations, and they, ask people around the world, who do they fear the most? It's the United States.
Yeah.
We are not coming in to save them from democracy. I was asked on one of these podcasts the other day, how can we, what can we do about, the growth of fascism around the world and these fascists that are rising, like Bolsonaro in Brazil?
Yeah.
I said, well, the first thing the U.S. can do is stop supporting the fascists.
That's right.
Bolsonaro got in there with the help of the Justice Department with this sort of judicial coup that got rid of the Workers' Party leaders.
The Obama Justice Department, by the way.
That's right.
Yeah.
And, you mentioned Obama, the coup in Honduras.
Yep.
They grabbed President Zelaya in his pajamas.
Yep.
And brought him out of the country, just like they took Aristide in his pajamas and flew him to Africa and Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of thing that Americans don't realize. And our reporting and our political leaders don't talk about.
Right. Well, see, and that's the thing, though. It's, again, because people want to believe. And they also want to believe in their red and blue shit, too. Because I got blue friends to this day still won't post a bad thing about a Democrat and get mad when I do. And I got Republican friends that cannot admit. I got a few friends now that are finally admitting that on this COVID thing that Trump needs to shut up. He's the Jerry Jones of politics. He needs to shut up, get out of the way. Let the quarterback be the fucking quarterback. Let the coach be the coach.
He makes Jerry Jones sound like a genius compared to what Trump's doing. And Jerry Jones, I'm not a Jerry Jones fan, but
neither am I. But you know what though? He's making me want to vote for Jerry Jones. I mean, that's how bad it is. But he's right. But here's the thing though. He's doing shit that, not entirely, but he's doing a lot more things left of the Democrats. It's like he wants to have Medicare and Medicaid and insurance are now going to pay for COVID. What was Hillary Clinton's big fix? Open the exchanges. Unemployment's 32% right now, but open the exchanges. Way to go, Miss Medicare for All will never come to pass. I mean, that's the kind of thing when you're talking about people not knowing. It's willful, man. They don't want they're dyed in the wool with this shit. They don't want to know. I mean, I'm fighting with people right now, liberals supposedly, like lefty. Gay is okay. Whatever you want to do is cool. But man, they're all about Biden now, ignoring everything, including the crime bill, including gutting bank regulations, including gutting welfare. They're forgiving him of everything because they hate Trump that bad.
Well, have your Biden friends think about this. The health insurance companies may be the next bailout because they're having to pay for a lot more with this coronavirus crisis than they had planned on. And what I think is going to bail them out is not a direct bailout. It's going to be the expansion of the Affordable Care Act, which is subsidies for buying private insurance.
Right.
So when Biden gets in there, we may see the health insurance companies bailed out with an expansion of the Affordable Care Act,
right,
which is a lot more expensive than having a single public payer.
That's right.
Medicare for All system.
That's right.
So, tell them to grab onto their wallets and think about that.
Right. Right. No, I gotta stop getting angry. Like, you seem like a pretty calm guy, right? You seem like you're pretty chill. You've seen some shit in your life, right? You're in the Marines. By the way, we didn't have Rambo back then when I was in boot camp, but John Wayne was the guy. Okay, yeah.
And these guys that want to come in and be John Wayne,
right.
This was an officer boot camp. They got thrown out because you got to have teamwork in a platoon. You can't have heroes.
Can't have John Wayne.
Guys that want to be John Wayne,
right? They
got thrown out of the school.
Real quick before I ask you this next topic, real quick side note. I think you'd get a kick out of this. 1943 or 4, John Wayne went to a hospital in Hawaii where guys were getting, trucked in from Japan, losing legs and blown apart and everything. So, grown ass man, he shows up in his cowboy outfit with his 6-shooters and his spurs, to boost up morale. I think it was like Hedy Lamarr, some hot chick, and then John Wayne. He got booed out of the hospital. The entire ward booed him out of the hospital because they figured out he's a fucking movie star. He wasn't Audie Murphy. He wasn't Jim Braddock. He wasn't Hank Greenberg. He was a total poser, and they figured it out, right? He wasn't Jimmy Stewart. They figured it out, and they were like, no, because of your fucking war movies, I lost a leg, dickhead. I enlisted, right? And so it's that whole war is a racket bit. But let me ask you something. So in 2016, there's a lot of momentum with Jill Stein and even Gary Johnson, because I think people were just really disgusted. It still got quashed by the mainstream media, still got, I stomped on. It wasn't until the very, very end that, Johnson and Stein got some town halls, kind of as a little, okay, people are paying attention. And then, the debate committee, which is a total privately held corporation in and of its own, had these astronomical numbers that you had to have popularity-wise to get into the debates, which is a vicious circle, because if nobody really knows who you are, and how are they going to know who you are if you're not being covered? But did the Green Party, after the fact, did y'all do like an autopsy, like supposedly the Republicans did in 2012? Did you take a look internally and say, hey, listen, we have to do this moving forward. We've got to tune this up. We've got to get more locals running. We've got to. What happened after 16?
Well, there was a lot of focus on the recounts in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania.
Right.
Because some things didn't look on the up and up. So that's what Jill Stein's campaign focused on. And there were some lawyers that first went to the Clinton campaign, and the Clinton campaign didn't want anything to do with it.
Right.
So then Move On put out a request for funds for this effort, and they raised $7 million in like a week, which is a lot more than more than double what she raised in her whole campaign. So that's where a lot of the energy went. And the Greens, we're very grassroots, and so we have, different state parties and locals, and so they went back to, doing their local work. And there was some discussion, but there was really no, final report with everybody agreeing on the points.
Sure.
But, my argument is, if we're going to build the Green Party into a major party and force in American politics, we got to build it from the bottom up.
Right.
There's 500,000 offices up for election in this country. The Greens have 160 of them, which is more than any third party on the left has had since the heyday of the Socialist Party before the 1930s. But it's still a drop in the bucket.
Sure.
There's a lot of opportunity for us to grow. And when we elect people locally, then the people that elected them locally and see how we perform say, well, why can't they win for state legislature or Congress? And then when we get to that level, when we have a caucus in Congress, our presidential ticket will be hard to ignore.
Right.
So I think, that's what I've been urging Greens to think about. Then the question is, well, if you want to build from below, why the hell are you running for president? And the answer to that is because in about 40 of the states, the vote we get in the presidential run, or maybe it's another statewide office in which the presidential candidate may have coattails, determines whether the Green Party will have a ballot line in the next election cycle, the next 4 years.
Right.
And having a ballot line makes it a lot easier to get on the ballot. A lot less signatures, lower filing fees. In general, there are 51 different jurisdictions, counting the District of Columbia. They all have their own election laws. So, I know in New York, it's the difference between, say you want to run for Congress, between in this congressional district getting 50 signatures of Greens versus 3,500 signatures of people with an independent nominating petition. And it's a lot easier to go, call a meeting of the Greens and get your signatures than to spend all summer. We just have a 6-week window. So spending 6 weeks in the summer getting on the ballot. And then, of course, the Democrats say, well, they do challenges to your petitions. A lot of them are trivial. They're not real. But that drags out the process until the State Board of Election can have a hearing. I mean, one year I did run for Congress, and it wasn't until the first week of October that I was certified on the ballot. That hearing finally happened. In the meantime, the Democrat is saying to the media and the various civic groups having debates, he shouldn't be in the debate because he's not on the ballot, even though I'd completed my petition in August. So, that's what we're up against without a ballot line. Once we got a ballot line, the Democrats didn't even try to knock us off the ballot because it was very easy to get 50 good signatures or whatever the number was from Greens that were registered. So that's a big deal. So that's one thing we get out of the presidential run. It enables us to run much more readily a lot of local candidates.
Right. So, I know the answer to this question, but it's a new race and a new year, and you're doing it now. Have you seen any kind of different reaction from mainstream media, like CNNs or the MSNBCs of the world, or are your press people having any luck trying to get you a few minutes with Rachel Maddow or Don Lemon or something, or are they just don't want to know?
at this point, there's some reporters that want to know.
Right.
But we really made an effort when both CNN and MSNBC did town halls on climate change. And I was the first candidate in this country to campaign for a Green New Deal in 2010.
Right.
So I'm the original Green New Dealer. So we went to them with that angle. And some of the reporters were interested, even some of the hosts, but it was up to the producers.
Right.
And they were like, well, you aren't even the nominee yet. So come back when you're the nominee and we'll see. And so that, is a difficulty we've had. Now, I have to say, after Sanders got his bottom whooped in Super Tuesday,
yeah,
and then Big Tuesday, and then he dropped out, and then he endorsed Biden, I'm getting more inquiries from, media. I've been in The Economist, The Washington Post, The Washington Examiner, Washington Times, New York Post. I was on Michael Isikoff's podcast. So, we're getting some nibbles, but that's different than being in the narrative. In other words,
right.
The narrative right now is Trump versus Biden, although there's not much of that with the coronavirus crisis going on.
Right.
But, that's always been, my difficulty. Even after I got 5% in New York, the media would write stories about the Democrat and the Republican. The Republican was hopeless. The Republican can't win in New York.
Right.
So, when sometimes reporters will say, well, why should we cover you? You can't win. And I say, well, why should you cover the Republican? He can't win.
Right.
So they would write stories where it's Democrat, Republican, and then at the end they'd add, and Howie Hawkins, who got 5% of the vote, is running too. So I'm sort of the afterthought.
Isn't the state assembly in New York, though, I might be mistaken on this, aren't they largely Republican in the state assembly?
No, the assembly is largely Democratic.
Oh, it is? Okay.
The Senate has been Republican forever until the current session.
Okay.
They finally got it. And, this is our problem with the Democrats. The assembly voted through a New York single-payer plan called New York Health repeatedly since 1992.
Wow.
And then they would say, well, we can't get it done because the Republicans control the Senate. So then the Democrats get control of the Senate. And then this session, the Democrats won't even pass it in the assembly. Suddenly they got a problem. And we do know, because we can look at the financial disclosures that are reported to the state, the health insurance industry and the drug companies have been pouring money into the Democrats in New York State.
Wow.
So that changed their tune.
Wow. See, and this is what pisses me off, man. It's like these guys, when you said earlier with ranked choice voting, I want to make it illegal for private nonprofit companies to run the government. That means the Democrats and the Republicans. You go to publicly funded elections, because I may as well have GM and the Red Cross running the fucking country if I'm going to get Democrats and Republicans, right? I mean, between them and ALEC and the committee to do debates and all that crap, it's all private corporations. The Democrats and Republicans are two nonprofit companies whose clients are lobbyists and companies, right? And so it's just like these guys get into office. In the beginning, look at AOC. She flamed out in the first 3 months. People were bitching at me for the last year and a half because I was calling her a sellout after she got on the cover of Nancy Pelosi and the Fraud Squad. And everyone's like, oh, you're so negative. You're just such a negative Nelly. She's trying. After that echo stunt she pulled in Nancy Pelosi's office, she hasn't done shit. She gave a standing ovation to Juan Guaido the same night that Nancy Pelosi did on the State of the Union address. She deferred to Democratic leadership on Venezuela, on Bolivia. You're elected to fight these people. You're elected to know this shit. It takes nothing. 10 minutes on Wikipedia. You can know all you want to know about Venezuela. When they were capitalist in the 80s and 50% of the people were starving, we were cool with it. Now that they're socialists and won't give us their shit for free, right? Now we want to give them human rights.
Yeah, well, and there's an irony there in that when it was led by capitalist parties, they had a nationalized oil company. They nationalized their oil like a lot of countries, left-wing and right-wing did. If you go back and look, they did it while this country was caught up in the Watergate scandal.
Right.
And they figured this is a good time to get control of our resources. And then after Chavez got in there and now Maduro, the country is still 70%, private capitalist firms.
Right.
which isn't, there are many countries that have a much larger public sector and public enterprises, in Western Europe and China. I mean, lots of countries. So, the problem is these guys won't play ball with our foreign policy and our designs for hegemony in Latin America.
Right.
And that's the real beef, that it's not even capitalism and socialism. It's these guys aren't puppets of us. And that's I think, their biggest beef. And yeah, I was very critical of AOC when the Green New Deal, she and the Sunrise Movement took the Green Party brand. That was our signature issue throughout the 2010s, and diluted the content. So by the time that non-binding resolution for a Green New Deal got to Congress, it eliminated the ban on fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure. It eliminated the phase out of nuclear power. It eliminated the deep cuts in the military budget to help fund the Green New Deal. Right. And it extended the deadline from 2030 to 2050 to zero out greenhouse gas emissions. So we were very critical of that. And it's worth noting that even though it was watered down, Nancy Pelosi has never let the House vote on it. Mm. They did get to vote on it in the Senate because McConnell wanted all the Democrats, half of them are running for president, to go on the record. And Schumer said, oh, that's a trick. Let's all vote present. And all the Democratic senators voted present instead of for the Green New Deal, except the four of them that voted with the Republicans no. So that's just to tell Democrats out there, if you think you're going to get climate action and a Green New Deal from the Democratic Party, I'm not even talking about Joe Biden. I'm talking about the Democratic
Democrats.
Party. Yeah, they're not going to do it. Their policy on energy is all of the above, which means fracking the hell out of the country.
Sure.
And heating up the planet as the world's #1 producer of oil and gas.
Well, Obama increased fracking and drilling in this country to the tune of 88% during his administration. He approved Arctic drilling twice. We have 2,000 cities with water as bad, if not worse than Flint, because of fracking, right? And yet, I just saw his endorsement video of Biden, and he's talking like he's Santa Claus. I'm like, dude, you're a prick. You kicked 5.1 million people out of their homes. I could go on. I mean, he cracked the heads of peaceful protesters at Occupy, at DAPL. Let's see how this plays out. I mean, he's just not an honest. He's meaner than Mitt Romney. And what pisses me off when you talk about like how these two parties are so similar. During the 2012 debate, I thought for sure Mitt Romney would have brought up that Obama gutted habeas corpus. And he didn't. Not during one of those 2012 debates. There's 3 of them. He didn't bring it up not one time. He didn't bring up anything that Obama did that was like that. And I'm thinking, because he's thinking, yeah, gutting habeas corpus. That's a great idea. I wish we did it. I wish we did it sooner. I mean, I don't know what he's thinking, but it just seems like the Republicans are so on board with the Democrats. Like you said earlier, guns, gays, and abortion. Those are the only differences, and those are cosmetic differences that they just throw like chum to the sharks at the people to get them to vote for them.
They divide us. Now, I think those are important issues. I'm on the progressive side of those questions, but that shouldn't obscure the fact that when it comes to economic policy, they're both very pro-corporate.
Yep.
And they're screwing us, and that's why working class life expectancies are declining.
That's right. Our
living standards are declining. What people's expectations were that they would improve, and they've gone backwards. So you have what the sociologists now call deaths of despair. That's part of the opioid addiction.
Yeah.
And people not take care of themselves. They expected to do better, and they're not. And and we have this culture where if you're not doing well, it's your own damn fault.
Right.
And ignore the fact that wages have been stagnant since 1973. In fact, $1 less in real terms on average.
Right.
And housing and healthcare and college educations have gone through the roof in costs. So the boomers are retiring without any savings. They raised their families, they worked their whole lives, and now they're living on Social Security, which doesn't bring them up above poverty.
Right.
And, there are even some people whose Social Security checks are being garnished to pay for student loans.
Ugh.
It's just cruel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Obama, the thing that really struck me was when he was running for re-election in 2012, he had leaked to the press Terror Tuesdays, where he personally picked the drone strike assassination.
Right. He wanted to look tough.
To look tough. but he's being judge, jury, and executioner,
right,
and assassinating people.
right.
And then they had the signature strikes, where if a group of young men are somewhere in the Middle East congregated, we just assume they're terrorists and we blast them away.
Right.
And that, so we wonder why we have enemies. That just creates more enemies. And then when you mention how so many people lost their homes, well, who are some of the biggest corporate criminals in that? They're now in the Trump administration.
That's right. Steve
Wilbur
Mnuchin.
Ross.
Yeah.
And Steve Mnuchin, right.
Yep.
Wilbur Ross had mortgage servicing companies. And he was in the middle of that robo-signing scam, which was computerized fraud to steal people's homes.
He sure was.
And Mnuchin had a fair share of that after doing enormous predatory lending and foreclosures.
Well, and a really quick side note on Mnuchin, because I'm from California. I've only been living in Austin 5 years. Kamala Harris was one of the worst attorney generals we've ever had, and her investigators brought 1,000 cases in front of her of fraud by One West Bank, which was a Goldman Sachs subsidiary, and she not only didn't prosecute, she refused to indict. And the investigators we have 1,000 more cases. We've got thousands of these cases. People that were told, hey, don't pay your mortgage for 90 days. We'll reset it into a traditional loan, get you out of this ARM or get you out of this interest-only loan. And 90 days later, oh, you're behind on your loan. Now you got to pay the whole thing or we take your house. Well, wait, we don't have a record of that. And that's flat out fraud. And Mnuchin was responsible for that.
No, they were stealing homes.
Yes,
and now Blackstone is the biggest landlord in the country. They scooped up a lot of those homes, private equity firm. And, Holder said at the beginning of Obama's second administration in a Senate hearing that he basically said, this is the way the Wall Street Journal characterized it. These guys are too big to jail. So they didn't prosecute. Right. And because Democrats like Obama and Holder or Kamala Harris, because they didn't prosecute these corporate criminals, now they're in charge of the Treasury Department and the Commerce Department. And so I hold the Democrats partly responsible for the people that are now in this criminal Trump administration.
Sure. Well, Jesus Christ. Citigroup sent Obama his cabinet in an email. God bless WikiLeaks, right? But we got the few minutes we got left. I wanted to ask you about the stimulus bill and what your thoughts were on that, because to me, that was just giving money to the very same guys we've been talking about, and now they're going to buy a bunch more shit at fire sale prices. Is that wrong?
Yeah, it's wrong. What we should have done was what Denmark did. They basically set up a social insurance program for businesses so they could pay their payroll, their rent, their utilities, and just sort of hold themselves in place until this coronavirus thing is over. And that way everybody was still getting paid. Now we've got massive unemployment, and there's some money for small businesses. It wasn't enough. And it's the bigger small businesses that know how to get it. The little guys, they're just trying to figure out, how to do it. And half the small businesses in this country don't have a month's worth of cash reserves. So we're having bankruptcies already. And we're destroying, and small businesses employ half of the workforce.
Yeah, they do.
But we are setting ourselves up not for a, bounce back when we get back from Corona, but a long depression, unless we, start doing the things to rebuild the economy. And for me, given that we haven't supported our small businesses, we haven't put enough money in the pockets of people who now face evictions and foreclosures. $1,200 one time. When you're not working, that's just not going to cut it.
No.
So those things need to be done right now. But as we come out of this, that's where I think the Green New Deal I'm talking about makes sense. It's, nearly $3 trillion a year. And, after there was an interesting study by the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank, which said that after wars, the economy comes back because everything got destroyed and you had to rebuild it.
Right.
Whereas after pandemics, historically, there's a long period of depression,
right?
Because you're just trying to get what you had back together. Well, we need to rebuild our whole manufacturing infrastructure. Right. First of all, we need to rebuild it because we don't have a machine tool industry in this country to speak of.
Right. And
you need that to build the machinery for intermediate goods and consumer goods. And then we got to transform all our technologies so they're not putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and plastic and other waste into the environment.
Right.
So, for example, we can produce steel with electric arc furnaces instead of coke ovens. And the industry is actually moving that way, but they're not moving fast enough because they want to wear out the coke ovens before they replace them.
Right.
Or utilities, servo-mechanical grids with centralized power plants. They don't want to move to a digital smart grid that can accommodate distributed solar and wind energy. So these are areas we need to bring into the public sector to make it happen. Like during World War II emergency, the federal government took over or built a quarter of the manufacturing capacity of the country in order to turn industry on a dime into the arsenal of democracy, which armed the US, the UK, and Russia to defeat the Nazis. We need to do that same kind of thing to defeat climate change. And now I would say to defeat the coronavirus.
Right.
That we have the legislation, the Defense Production Act, and Trump won't bring in the people that can implement it. No. You know, we should have, like during World War II, we had the Office of War Mobilization. Now we need an Office of Climate Mobilization. And we need an office to do the corona mobilization.
Right.
And, you know, they should have a plan to produce and line up all the supply chain and then distribute these medical supplies to where they're needed, including the testing, the contact tracing, and the quarantining program that we're going to need to do to reopen the economy safely.
Right.
And the federal government isn't even on square one on that.
Right.
You know, Trump, he wants us to just go back and die for the Dow. I mean, it's negligent mass murder. The guy he should just get out of the way.
Hey, let me ask you something. And by the way, I love that line, "Die for the Dow." I think I'm going to call your episode that. I think that's what I'm going to name it. "Die for the Dow." Okay. That's a great title, man. You should write a book. But so you referenced World War II a second ago, and FDR, and we haven't had this since FDR, but we actually had a federal jobs program that put 11 million people to work for a number of years. Since between Bush and Obama, we basically gutted. There's a reason why we don't have masks and ventilators and enough drugs, because, you know, we've created every single deal with China that we could under Obama and Bush. Is there a way to create a federal jobs program to enact what you're saying, for example?
Yeah, we scale up the Works Progress Administration you just referred to the point where everybody who's willing and able to work and can't get a job in the private sector can get a public job on public services or public works.
Okay.
So instead of going to the unemployment office, you go to the employment office and say, I want my job. And local communities, this is what they did during the Works Progress Administration, they designed most of these programs, both public services and public works or infrastructure. And the local governments paid 10%, the federal government paid 90%. You want the local government buying in so you avoid boondoggles, and you know, it's serious for them. So communities know best what they need. You know, what services, you know, do the kids need supervision in the parks? Do elders need taken care of? Do we need more childcare? And then the public works. I mean, I'm in Syracuse. We have combined sewer and rainfall outflow, and the water. I mean, there are water mains under here that are wooden, going back to the 1800s. Others are brick. And just about every day, one of them collapses and the road collapses in on top of it. So we're just patching it up. We need to rebuild our sewer and water systems.
Right.
That will keep people working for years and years.
Sure.
And, you know, we can always make improvements to our public amenities. A lot of those things that were built under the Works Progress Administration, we still use today.
Yeah. Well, we've got like 60. Yeah, we've got like 6. Yeah, we've got like 60,000 bridges that need rebuilding. That alone would put people to work, right?
Right. Yep. Bridges, roads. We need to rebuild our rails. That's you know, an environmental and a way to solve our damn traffic problems. As I was driving around before this lockdown, I couldn't believe how bad the traffic has got. Every city's got a traffic jam.
Right.
And, you know, back in the 1890s and the 1930s, every city had a light rail trolley system.
Right.
Every other country is building high-speed bullet trains.
Right.
We got Amtrak, which is decrepit.
Right.
And slow. And it has to wait for freight trains. And the freight trains here in New York, almost every day it seems we get a derailment on the freight rails. You know, that CSX runs.
Right.
And so we need to electrify our rail systems. We need to rebuild and densify the freight rails, have less freight on the roads and more on the rails. I mean, that's a whole huge project. And that's another area I think needs to be done through the public sector. You know, a National Rail Corporation, maybe even the National Transportation Corporation, bring the airlines in on it so we can coordinate scheduling between the bullet trains, which can get you between cities on short and intermediate distances faster than going to the airport, going through security, waiting. They want you there 2 hours ahead. Then you got to wait for your baggage. All that, a bullet train will get you where you want to go faster and with less pollution than air travel.
Right.
So, and airlines are cheap right now. Be a good time to do it.
Yeah.
Although Trump's not going to do it.
Yeah. And see,
he'll bail him out.
See, well, that's the thing. Is like we're running syphilis and gonorrhea again, man. That's what makes me so mad about people. Like right away, without missing a beat, jumping right onto the Biden thing, and what blows my mind is black and brown people voting for him, because I'm like, dude, that guy could not be more antithetical to your cause. I mean, I hear all the time, new slavery, the prison system. Thank Joe Biden, and then they look at you like you're doing card tricks in front of a dog when you say that. It's just really, it's bad, dude.
Yeah. I live in a mostly black community. A lot of people here, they don't love the Democrats. They just afraid of the Republicans. To them,
yeah,
a lot of people come from the South. It's, that's the Klan. They just took off their hoods. So it's a defensive vote, not an affirmative vote.
Sure.
And so, what we got to do in the Green Party is organize at the grassroots so they know who we are. We have relationships. They trust us. And they see what we can do, and I think we'll win their votes. But that's a longer term process than just another half-year election campaign. It's what Greens have to do at the grassroots. I think Bernie failed to do that in the 5 years from 2015 until 2020.
Yeah,
he didn't build an organizing infrastructure, particularly in the South, where he got clobbered again by the black vote.
Right,
and that's because he got the young black people. He won the policy argument with them, but the older folks, they took the lead of their leaders like Clyburn and said, we're voting for the guy we think can beat Trump.
Right.
Joe Biden may not be. Well, Biden also, because he was affiliated with Barack Obama as the vice president and being the first black vice president, that carries a lot of credit in the black community.
Right.
Because, most people vote with their guts. They don't, do a lot of research. It's not a intellectual thing. It's a gut thing.
Sure.
Which goes back to organizing. We've got on the left got to organize at the grassroots and build relationships so people trust us.
Right.
And, of course we want to educate and encourage people to get educated, but a lot of it's emotional.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, I just, like I said, I get into discussions with folks all the time, black and brown folks all the time, that don't even know what the crime bill is. And I'm like, well, how are you going to complain about the prison system if you don't know what the crime bill is? That's the mother of what happened. My other thing, we got a few minutes here, but, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but this seems to be a new trend, and it's really disturbing because people will say, well, that's history. That's in the past. Well, that happened before, man. Don't bring up Obama. It's not, Trump's president now. I'm like, well, how the fuck we get here? And if we're talking about history being in the past, then don't bring up Jesus to me, as Bill Hicks said, because that's in the past, right? We just had Easter from something that happened 2,000 years ago. I can give a shit. There's 3,000 other gods, man. I don't care. It's like Jesus might be your friend, but he won't pick you up at the airport, right? It's like, who cares? It's history. This trend is disturbing. I got people telling me, oh, those women, they're not credible. There's like 9 women against Biden right now, that they're not credible, or that's history. I'm like, well, then pussy grabbing's history. Walking into the closet at the Miss America pageant, and ogling half-naked chicks because you can, that's history. Flying on Epstein's plane, that's history. Him and Bill Clinton, Slick Willie. See, and this is the dark part of this that people don't like when I bring up it. Screw it, we're not on cable television. These guys take money from the same people that we don't want them taking money from, and they all fly on Epstein's plane, doing God knows what to God knows who. Both Clinton and Trump been on that fucking plane. Bill Richardson, Alan Dershowitz, all those guys. They're just a corrupt, depraved bunch of assholes. So why do we keep voting for them? I want to vote for you guys.
Well, we just keep plugging away and, educating, building relationships. And, I would say to progressive activists, the problem we got right now is we got a lot of single issue groups and campaigns, which in the last analysis end up just lobbying the Democrats because they're the lesser evil. And they get taken for granted because the Democrats got you in their pocket when it comes to voting. And meanwhile, the single issue groups are competing with each other.
Sure.
For attention, for, supporters, for money. And what a party can do is bring those issues together in a comprehensive program and bring those constituencies together. And it's got to be done at the grassroots, because that's where, we're not going to, break through the corporate media alone. I mean, I think we can get, word in now and then. We got to do it underneath, the social media, the corporate media, on the streets, in the communities, and then build on that, because that's how we're going to build the relationships that will give support to an alternative force. Otherwise, people just react to what they see on TV. I mean, Here in Syracuse, the Greens are the second party. Democrats have all the seats. We always come in ahead of the Republicans. They're the third party. But a lot of voters, because they see the Democrats and Republicans on the, network TV, they're still afraid of the Republicans.
Right.
We can't vote for the Greens. The Republicans might get elected. They're not going to get elected in this city. It's a very cosmopolitan, half people of color. The white people tend to be liberal. They're attached to the university. So Republicans are hopeless here.
Right.
It's not even an issue. But because people don't follow local politics, or we aren't strong enough yet to reach a lot of people, they kind of take their cues from that national narrative and apply it to the local situation where it doesn't apply.
Right. Oh, man. Well, Howie, I'm really glad you came on. I'm going to have to wrap it up, but really quick, and I'm going to put this in the body of the show, but what's your website? It's HowieHawkins2020.org?
No, HowieHawkins.us.
And that's all just one word, right?
Howie Hawkins, right.
Awesome, man.
WIEHAWKINS.us. And you can put the www in front, or you can put the https:// in front.
Sure.
You can just Google HowieHawkins.us. It'll get you there.
Awesome, man. And so folks can contribute to the campaign, reach out to you guys, that kind of thing.
That's what you can do on the website. Find out more about what we're saying, volunteer, donate, or just sign up to get our campaign reports.
Yeah.
We send out regular information about the issues. We do ask for money, but it's not like the Democrats think I'm a guy named Andy in Iowa, and I get all of their money appeals and all of their candidates except Bernie Sanders. I guess he wasn't in on it.
Right.
But all those other Democratic presidential candidates, a bunch of Iowa Democrats running for this, that, and the other thing, the Democratic National Committee, I see it all. And, I glance at them, and there's no meat there. It's all just give us money.
Right.
And we give you some substance along with the money appeal.
All right. Well, hey, listen, you got to have the money. Unfortunately, this is the society we live in. Campaigns ain't cheap, and so I bear no one any ill will for campaign donations. And plus, like you said, you got meat on your site, so that works out. Listen, guys, I got to wrap it up here. Our guest has been Howie Hawkins. He's running for president for the Green Party for 2020. Let's hopefully you heard a lot of what he has to say, a lot of great ideas, and you can always visit his website, HowieHawkins.us. Also, if you want to become a member and support the show, obviously you could listen to this on all the usual suspects at no charge, but we appreciate the support at patreon.com/The Bitter Truth. Also, catch my Tuesday articles at TexasFreePress.com. I've been getting away with murder for the last couple of months there. I don't know how long they'll keep letting me write for them, but so far it's been okay. So they haven't canned me yet. But guys, again, if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.